Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here again. And we can learn and journey these topics of pride and humility together as we go through being with Jesus in our weekly so-called devotion on specific topics. Um, Today, if you just open your books, just quickly summarize on the top. The reading today is on symptoms of pride. Yeah, so you can see on the table, there are the symptoms there. But what I'm going to do is, again, the best thing I believe in learning is to learn from people who make mistakes. So today, I'm going to share about two persons. Okay, if you can see my slide properly. Okay, we're going to learn about pride and humility from two great leaders in the Old Testament, and they are King Uzziah and King David. And you'll be surprised why we need to, uh, what's happening to King David. We know that he's such a great leader. He's the person who, he went after God's heart. But there's something which we need to learn about pride from David. Yeah, you can just turn to Old Testament, Second Chronicles chapter 26, and this is the story about King Uzziah. He is also known as Azariah. Okay, in Second Kings chapter 15. It's briefly mentioned in Second Kings chapter 14, and in Second Kings chapter 14, we were told his name, apart from Azariah, is also Uzziah. And his father was Amaziah. So he became king at age of 16, and he reigned for 52 years. And the Bible told us at that time there were a few prophets, and one of them was Prophet Zechariah, Amos, and also Isaiah. But most likely he was mentored and discipled by the prophet Zechariah. And King Uzziah started well, and he really feared God. If you read through Second Chronicles chapter 26, he started really well until the Bible recorded that he did what was right in the eye of the Lord. It is found in verse 4 of Second Chronicles chapter 26. And because of that, I believe God has blessed King Uzziah, and he's very multi-talented. He started in verse 6 all the way down to verse 15. I just highlighted a summary of his achievements. Okay, he is really a great leader, and he expanded, in a sense, his country's territory. Okay, through victories in multiple battles, and he increased Judah's so-called finance. Okay, we talked about budget, just last week, the budget of the country, and because other defeated, in a sense, nation has to pay tribute to him, and he has great success in agriculture. He is a great military strategist, and he is also, in today's term, a great innovative designer. Okay, all this is in the few verses I highlighted there. There's only one key success factor we can find in the life of King Uzziah in his earlier part of his life, yeah, meaning he sought guidance from God. It is found in verse 5. This is very important. Okay, in the earlier part of his life, when he was mentored, when he was discipled by the prophet Zechariah, he sought guidance from God. And because of that, success followed King Uzziah. But this is where now we need to pay our attention to King Uzziah. But we found in two places, okay, in verse 8 and verse 15, the same message. His fame spread, for he was strong. And that's when pride came into King Uzziah's life. I believe this is the watershed moment for King Uzziah or any great leaders in today's time. When your fame started to spread and you became strong, and in a sense, invincible. Satan started to attack and pride came in. What did King Uzziah do? Okay, he entered the temple of the Lord and he wanted to burn the incense on the altar. Meaning, because he has achieved so much, pride has taken over his heart. And to him, he believed that he can do the duty of the priest. Now, in today's world, if you want to preach on the pulpit, I said, Pastor Swimming will say, go ahead, if you are ready, okay, no problem. But not during that time. Why was it such a big deal? Because the duty was only reserved for the priests who were consecrated. You can copy down these two verses. It's found in Exodus chapter 30 and Numbers chapter 18 verse 7. Numbers 18 verse 7 is very serious. If you are not a priest, okay, and you perform the rites, you will be put to death. This is how serious it was. And another thing, if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 13, King Saul made the same mistake. While waiting for the prophet Samuel to arrive, he cannot wait anymore. He cannot tahan anymore. So he burned an offering. And because of that, we know that it started the downfall of Saul. So King Uzziah was a descendant, so he would have heard the story of what happened to his predecessor. But yet he forgot about this whole chapter because pride has taken over his heart. Last week when I was sharing about failures, I talked about the 5 C's. Today, I'm just again recap, when we look at the so-called process of downfall of somebody, it started with the cause, then the characteristic, then what happened to the consequence. In this case, it's very clear-cut what brought the downfall of King Uzziah, because he was unfaithful. He was unfaithful. And when he became unfaithful, in today's term, he backslided. And when he backslided, this is when pride started to come and taken over his heart. And lo and behold, we know that he fell. He didn't end up well. As we study his failure or his downfall due to pride, okay, it is a very familiar path if we look at all the historical great leaders. Okay, it started with, of course, we can say they ignored warnings. If you look at verse 20, okay, Azariah the prophet and 80 other priests, okay, stopped King Uzziah. Now imagine today there are 81 pastors giving you stern warning. Okay, it is that serious. 81 godly men and women give us a warning. We need to take heed of the warning. So it's a very familiar path for somebody who has been, in a sense, consumed by the pride. Ignored the warning and he became agitated and he was defiant. And we know he didn't end up well. It ended with affliction, okay, for King Uzziah. It's a very, very familiar path of process, as I said, when we analyze all the great leaders of the world. Okay, it just takes a small step and it is a spiral, okay, downfall. Somebody say this to King Uzziah: while seeking priesthood, he lost his kingship. So it blows a lot of people's mind. He was a king in a sense that he is so powerful, and yet why must he, take that kind of actions just to burn offering? Well, we know at the end he was struck down immediately while he was still arguing. Immediately, okay, leprosy, okay, started to appear on his forehead, and he need to leave the temple immediately because by the law, okay, if you are defiled and you were in the temple of God, you will be put to death immediately. So he knew that. So in a sense, God, okay, is very, very, in a sense, all-knowing. Rather than putting him to death, okay, some people call it God put Uzziah to a living death. Why is he a living death? Because he was not allowed to enter the temple anymore. In a sense, they had to quickly get his son Jordan to come in and co-rule the nation of Judah. And we knew that King Uzziah, at his last part of his life, he has to live in isolation. I believe this is a very, very sad story for somebody who was at the height of his life, pleasing God, doing things in the right of the God, seeking God. I believe praying to God. But one thing, as we analyze and study again, one thing that popped up, King Uzziah never ever gave thanks to God. If you read the Bible, he never ever gave thanks to God. And another reason for his downfall, this is found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 4. He did the same thing as his father and grandfather. He did not remove the idols. Okay, he did not remove the idol. So pride is one of the main cause. The other reason is also, okay, he did not remove idols from the nation of Judah, and the people were still worshiping him. So in a sense, what we are looking here is how pride, okay, even can attack and brings down a person at a very, very high level of success. Just a simple things, pride. Yeah. So we learn about King Uzziah, and this is what Matthew Henry's commentary, okay, it says here: man's pretending to forbidden knowledge, seeking things too high for them, are owing to the pride of heart. And Matthew Henry say this, I believe, very, very meaningful. The incense of our prayer must be by faith, put into the hands of our Lord Jesus, the great high priest of our profession. Else, we cannot expect it to be accepted by God. I believe this is very meaningful, and it spoke clearly, you know, what went through the mind of King Uzziah. He wanted to burn an offering, okay, not by faith, because he believed he can do so. Ignore the law passed down. So even for today, I believe sometimes in our, I will say, our routine, okay, worship to God is our prayer an act of faith, or are we trying to do things according to our own heart? Because the pride in us is detecting us that whatever we want to do, God surely will want to accept. Okay? Instead of putting it into the hands of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're going to move on. Again, a very familiar story, just a few verses, and it is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21. Just 7 verses. So we are at the point of time when Saul was pursuing David. And this is when David has fought for Saul against the Philistine. Okay, the Philistine people, meaning he chopped off the head of Goliath. But Saul, okay, was pursuing. And David had no choice. Okay, he ran to Gath. Okay, and he wanted to seek refuge, okay, with King Achis. I hope I pronounce it well, Achis. Okay, in a sense, his own enemy. But we read in verse 11, the king's officer recognized David, and they became suspicious why David came to their doorstep. Then we read, okay, further down, David was afraid, and he pretended to be insane until the point that he started to have drooling down his beard. Then King Achis said, "No, I'm not going to have this kind of madman, okay, here." So he drove David away. So David was so happy he can escape and to the cave of Adullam. And this is in 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1. As I said, a very simple message, but this is the most important part of David's life because it is his humiliation that really brought David down to his knee and, in a sense, confess his weakness, okay, in front of God. David, with the pride in his heart, earlier he thought that he can just bring the sword of Goliath and just appear in God. Okay, you can read that in the earlier part of 1 Samuel chapter 21. Because he thought that by bringing the sword of Goliath, people will respect him and will give him the refuge that he needs. And we read also the Philistines were also, they have heard of the song that David had killed thousands, okay, thousands of Philistines. But then David, while running away from physical danger, and while the pride in him was telling him this is how you should handle the situation, he ended up as an utter fool to himself because he had to act as an insane person. Because at that point of time, if you are crazy, apparently you will not be harmed, okay, according to the custom of that time. So you can imagine someone, I would say, full of pride, with like David. He came back with all kinds of victories, all kinds of records, okay, in the battlefield. And at that point of time, I would say he has no choice. In today's world, he has to make a fool of himself so that he can escape. Okay, that is really humiliation. Okay, that is really humiliation. So what is David's Adullam? Adullam, in another word, is refuge. So because while he was at the cave, is very significant because he wrote the two most beautiful psalms, Psalms 34 and also Psalm 56. At the lowest point of his time, when he has endured, I would say, the greatest humiliation, when he was crushed completely, he wrote these two psalms, Psalms 34. Okay, uh, I mean, in the earlier part of my life, when I was down and we were troubled, I always like to read Psalms 34 because I didn't realize at that point in time actually what was the background. But I found out, the situation, the emotional part when David wrote this psalm, it really, really blew my mind. You cannot imagine what went through David's mind when he wrote Psalm 34. Because in a sense, he said that this poor man himself called, and the Lord heard him. He admitted that he is really weak. And he said the most famous Psalms 34, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saved those who are crushed in spirit. And there's one thing, he is full of pride. I think this is what we should follow David's example. I will boast only in the Lord. We're talking about the positive boast, I believe, last few days. I will boast only in the Lord. In Psalms 34 verse 2, I use the NLT versions there. So this is what David's refuge is. If a person high and mighty, full of pride, but at his lowest point of his time, when he was crushed completely, he sought refuge in the Lord. Okay, I'm going to end here. So today's lesson, as I say, is about pride and humility from two great leaders. What can we learn from these two great leaders on the issues of pride? In Queen Uzziah's story, success comes from seeking guidance from God, not seeking guidance from any consultant. Okay? Seeking guidance from God. And we should be very proud of it, when God, grant us our success. But always remain thankful and obey his command. Again, we can see from King Uzziah. I mentioned earlier, I couldn't find a verse where he gave thanks to God. And clearly, he disobeyed God's command when he wanted to take over the role of the priest to burn the incense. Always remain thankful. And number three, God, being God, one day could test our pride through trial. Now, this could be your homework for you, Pastor. Okay, please read the story about King Hezekiah, and probably you can share tomorrow what kind of trial did God put him through in the area of pride. Okay, if you just read the Second Chronicles 26 further down a few chapters, you will be able to find a story about King Hezekiah. There's quite a number of chapters, but I believe this is an exercise for everybody. Share what kind of trial did God put Hezekiah through. So when we are in a trial sometimes, even today, remember God is testing us. Are we full of pride? And for the story of King David, sometimes it takes humiliations to remove the pride in us. I believe this is very, very significant because without this incidents, as I said, I believe David won't be able to read, really put in his whole heart the two Psalms. And as he said, I am a poor man. And yet he still declared, I will always boast in the Lord. And lastly, this is reminded by David when he was pursued by the Philistine. This is the incident at Gath. He said, fear the Lord, for those who fear him have all their need. It is a reminder to us whether we are successful or on the road to success or even on the road to fail. But David's reminder, fear the Lord, and God will grant us what we need.